take a look at the last 40 years of history through the prism of Marx's theories to show how they might explain the mess we're in. An imaginary Marxist broadcasting corporation would see it all as a good old 1970s style class struggle. As usual, the world's divided between workers and capitalists, always fighting to get a bigger slice of the pie. And the crisis happened, Marxists would argue, because the capitalists have been coming out on top a bit too often. The fight is over wages. Capitalists want to pay less, the workers want to get more. In the 70s, powerful trade unions battled to keep wages high. But then we come to the 80s, fight back time for capitalists. Marx would have seen Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan as acting purely in the interests of the capitalist bosses. It was their governments that helped business by getting rid of the obstacles that made it hard to cut wages.
The violence and intimidation we have seen should never have happened. It is the work of extremists. It is the enemy within.
If they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated. End of statement.
So for the Marxist Broadcasting Corporation, the capitalists won in the 1980s, and they kept on winning. The guaranteed high wages and job security that workers had enjoyed until the 70s had gone. And downward pressure on wages started to lay the seeds of the crisis we see today. Well, it's great telly. Is it actually true? Well, we know the Marxist view of history is right about one thing, at least in Britain and America. Earnings at the very top have soared in the last few years, and everyone else has been squeezed. In Britain, real earnings have been flat or falling for the best part of 10 years, since before the crisis. And in America, that's been happening since the 70s.
In the United States, a full-time male worker, median, income has stagnated for a third of a century. No increase. Household income today is the same as it was 15 years ago. All the increase of the income has gone to the top.
The share of income in the United States that was going to the top 1% of the households 20 years ago was around 12%. Today that share is closer to 23%.
Things haven't gone that far in the UK, but inequality is certainly creeping up the agenda. So have the greedy capitalists been picking the pockets of the workers? So why do I think all that money's been flowing to the top? Well, I don't think it's a big conspiracy, but there have been social and political changes that have made a difference. We used to have really big unions. We used to have very high tax rates on rich people. And we had social norms. It just wasn't done for the people running a bank to take a huge chunk of the profits for themselves. Those things help keep a lid on inequality. We don't have them anymore. But really crucial to all of this has been the changing structure of our economy. A lot of it's down to new technology. Work previously done by hand is now done by machines. Fewer workers needed, there are more competing for every job, meaning bosses can pay them less. But perhaps the most significant factor is globalization. With falling barriers to trade around the world, global business has gained access to a giant new pool of cheaper labour.
You have brought into the market now millions and millions of new workers. in China, in India, in other parts of Asia, in parts of South America, Brazil, for instance. So that process has transformed the capital-labor ratio on a global scale.
For example, an analyst can as well be sitting in the Philippines or in Mumbai to do the job that is done at a much higher price in New York.
Many workers in the rich countries are now competing with an industrial reserve army running into the billions.
I think in emerging market economies, there'll be an overwhelming vote in favour of what has happened because almost everyone is better off than they were and would have been. But that's less evident in the industrialised world, where many lower paid people have become even lower paid relative to those who have prospered. And that is a concern.
For years after World War II, we could be pretty sure Marx was wrong. Where you had capitalism, it was working pretty well. You could talk about a rising tide lifting all boats. But you look at the global economy today, I think you see a capitalism that Marx would recognise. It's lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty in China, but for most ordinary people in the West, the system's not working at all. For them, capitalism's not coming through on its side of the deal.